This video is going to be all about disassembly. We're going to tear down the car starting with the front. Grills coming out, fenders are coming off, bumpers coming out. I'll go ahead and strip the interior on the car, get the doors off, and ultimately get the engine and the transmission out. Fortunately, I've got extra help this time. Natalie came out with us for a little while. Madison, as you can see here, is giving me a hand taking everything down, and Skylar makes a couple of pop-in, pop-out appearances. Most of it's going to be time-lapse stuff just to save time, but the car should look very different by the end of this video. We'll put some music in the background and start tearing it down. Well, this is something that's going to need some attention. I've got an interference issue that I've had for a while here. It rubs when I open the door, and you can see that the paint's gone from the fender hitting the door. This is just from when this was installed. It didn't have the space it needs. So what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and mark this before I take everything apart with a marker to show where I need to cut, and I'll clearance this and cut and weld it back how I need and shape it. And it's the same thing on this other side here. I'll close the door, and you look here on this point, it's chipped the paint away, and it just rubs just enough. The camera shows it really well. It's just some proud spots on the door when somebody reskinned this years ago. So this will get the same thing. It'll get some reliefs with the marker. I'll just mark those areas where I need to shave it down, and it'll save me some steps for the bodywork when it comes time to reassemble the car. It'll be less mocking up, putting it on, taking it off. The kids are always fun help, and sometimes they they make things a little bit longer, but it's worth it. But the true help is when Shelly comes out, and she's that second set of hands for these things that you just can't do it by yourself. She got me out of a bind holding this fender while I searched for some missing bolts that I couldn't find what was hanging me up still.
bolts I organized, and then I put them there, and so we can organize them there. So, and I'm like trying to do this, but when Natalie came in, she messed it up, and so I had to do this, redo it.
Well, you did a nice job. What should we take apart next?
We should take apart this.
That? You want to see what it looks like with the motor out of it?
Yeah.
Well, I'm making some headway, as you saw, with some help. I've got the front fenders off. I've got the bumper off. I need to pull the motor out of it, but I'm waiting on somebody to come take a look at it and hear it run because I'm selling it. And I'm thinking that before I pull any of this out and I am not able to move the car anymore, I'll probably put it over in the other bay. The interior of this is going to need to come out, and to make it a lot easier, I think I'm going to pull the doors on it. Plus, doing the tubs, it'll just make things smoother so I can get in and out of there without fighting.
Now I'm on to the underside of the car, removing the things that I need to get out so I can get this motor out. Starting with the exhaust, I messed up here. I didn't take that O2 sensor out before I took this down, and it got hung up, so I had to hang it from the lift for a second and find a wrench to get that thing out. One thing that I have gotten better at this year is actually putting gloves on and wearing some of these job shirts or overshirts in the garage, just so I don't get so nasty and can kind of take breaks and get inside with the family and come back out. It makes it a whole lot more convenient. You can't see it here because the wheel's in the way, but the oil looked really good on this motor. It was in there for quite a while. I mean, for what it was, it's not the most powerful motor, but it always ran great for me, and it was a good motor for this car up until this point.
We're loosening motor bolts.
The purpose of breaking these motor mount bolts free is so that when we get the car on the ground, they're easy to come out. We still want to leave something in there so the motor doesn't shift or fall somewhere we don't want it to yet, but we're just getting everything free. And then also we're going to do the same for the cross member. This one I'll actually pull out, but I'm going to use this stand to hold it up in place. That way, once the bolts are out and the cross member's free, I can lower it a little bit more controlled.
Alright, so I got the underside prepped. I bet I hit this tire with my head probably 50 times. O2 sensor's out, speed sensor's out. Neutral safety switch was never hooked up, so I didn't have to disconnect that. I got the drive shaft out, as you saw, and the exhaust pulled. I did drain the oil, probably didn't have to. I'm going to roll the dice and try to leave the tranny fluid in it because there's no drain plug. I'd have to pull the fill tube. The radiator, I need to take the fluid out of the engine to disconnect the radiator, but this one unfortunately has no petcock or no drain. So I guess I'll have to break it at the lower radiator hose and hope I don't make a giant mess. I still have to disconnect the fuel lines, which I'll do here in a second, and the starter wire. And then from the bottom, I should be there. You saw that I loosened up the motor mount bolts just to make it easier once it comes time when I'm actually ready. I was too nervous to pull those all the way out just in case something settles and falls out. And that'd be embarrassing to drop it on the floor. On my floor, though, you can see it wouldn't be the first thing I've dropped. I dropped a transmission housing a little harder than I wanted to the other day. Left a big loose chunk, but there's that tire again. I'll wrap this up on the bottom and I should be able to pull it off from the top.
Probably gonna make a mess. A big one.
There's probably 15 other better ways to do that one, and I knew how that was going to turn out. I think everybody knew how that was going to turn out. I got a lower radiator hose off, and yeah. But the water that came out of it, this is why you got to be better at actually putting the antifreeze in. I had too much water, not enough antifreeze. And I was younger at the time and thought that it was just gonna cause it to be not as safe for freezing, but the antifreeze in these southern climates, it's not as much for stopping things from freezing. It's more for stopping things from rusting. The coolant has properties that stop this from happening. But you can see on the floor, the water was all settled on the bottom. The top side of it was clear. But I'll get the rest of it out, flush it, and I think that's it for the bottom. I don't think there's anything else to disconnect. I'll get the radiator lines off on the top and should be able to pull this motor out.
Well, as you can see, I've got the crew back out with me, and I'm ready to try to lift this motor. What I'm using here is a load leveler. I bought this inexpensive one off of Amazon. The way this works is it has a hand wheel on it, and it lets you change the center of gravity on the motor, allowing more tilt or less tilt. And the tie-in place is going to be the front and back of the heads. I will have to remove the alternator, but the other ones are just unused holes. The traditional way that I've done this is where you take the carburetor off and use the intake manifold bolts where the carb bolts down, a little carb plate. But being that this is the motor, transmission, headers, everything at once, it's a lot of trust in that aluminum intake manifold. So once the alternator's off, I hadn't realized it yet, but I'll have to take the carburetor off. I thought I'd have the clearance, but unfortunately the chains just weren't long enough. And if you've ever worked on anything and you've dropped a bolt under the car, you know what kind of a pain it is. So Maddie getting these little bolts that I dropped and handing them back to me was a huge help. Stopped me from crawling under the car, and it only took her away from racing this thing for maybe about 10-15 seconds.
Yeah, you are. What do you girls think? Is it gonna work?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's next?
Take that out.
Take what out?
The engine.
The engine?
Yeah.
Okay.
Remember, we're gonna take these out.
Yeah, that's on the to-do list also. Well, something that I overlooked was the power steering lines. You can see they got tight. I don't know why I was thinking the entire unit was coming out, but obviously the steering hooks to the power steering pump. So this line got tight. I got to pull that out. And because I elected to leave the headers on, I ran into a problem with the motor mounts. They were free, but the starter and more so the headers in the back side, I don't know if you can see it, were catching the other half of the motor mount. So even though I disconnected the motor mount, I had to fully pull it out. This is the first time I've pulled a motor with the headers on it, and it's kind of a pain.
Maybe I've gotten lazy, but if I know I'm not going to use an oil filter again, I've been using this screwdriver trick. It just beats trying to fight a filter wrench and getting things dirty and finding one that fits these oil filters. This one came off, and the next step is putting some mounts on the motor. So a couple years back I made these little welded up feet that I can put on motors, and I made it tall enough so that when I bolt them where the motor mounts go, I can set the motor back down. It holds it secure. It clears headers, it clears transmissions. It's pretty well balanced, and it makes it really nice for transporting stuff. So if you ever have to put a motor in a pickup truck, no more setting it on a tire. I can just put it on these little mounts, and it sits really nice on the floor.
Hindsight's 2020. I should have went ahead and drained the transmission fluid. Once I got high enough that the transmission was kicked back, everything started coming out of that gear sensor, or the speed gear hole. And then at some point I knocked the tip off of there, and that's where the mess came from. The pretty red oil, Maddie called it. The car's sitting way higher now, as to be expected. Those springs were real soft springs in the front, and it raised it probably 5 inches, I'd say. It's way up. This front point was 11.5 inches from here to the ground, and I'm significantly higher than that now. But we got some room to work. I'll get the steering out and the rest of this out, and I can start cutting and prepping for the TCI.
Well, that should do it for this video. I've just got to free up a couple things underneath, get that cross member secured again, and then with some help from the family, we'll put a driver behind the steering wheel and roll it outside. I will do a quick wash on it before the next video, that we can get into some clean parts when we start cutting stuff out and getting things in place to put that new suspension in.